think about the last time you were at like a crowded social event or maybe just a regular Tuesday morning stand-up meeting at work.
Hmm.
Your name is on the calendar invite, right? People say hello when you walk in. You are formally included in the space.
Now you're on the list.
Exactly. But as you look around the room, it suddenly hits you that nobody there actually has the faintest idea who you are.
Oof, yeah.
Or consider the exact opposite scenario. You have someone in your life who has you completely figured out. They read your moods, they anticipate your reactions, they know your history inside and out, and yet they use that precise knowledge to keep you permanently at arm's length.
Right. It's a incredibly disorienting paradox. And, it happens constantly. We walk around feeling profoundly isolated in rooms where we are explicitly welcome.
And that paradox is the entire engine of our deep dive today. We are exploring this really fascinating recent sociological essay that, well, it attempts to map out this exact feeling.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
The author argues that our culture is suffering from this quiet collapse in our everyday consciousness because we've fundamentally confused two completely distinct concepts, which are social acceptance and social understanding.
Right. We just treat them as the exact same thing.
We do. And the essay makes the case that this confusion is costing us heavily, in our homes, our workplaces, our communities.
Yeah, our cultural imagination just blends these two ideas into this undifferentiated blur. We chase after acceptance under this assumption that it's going to naturally result in being understood.
Because that's the goal, right?
Exactly. But when we secure the acceptance, and then the understanding never actually materializes, we're left feeling incredibly empty. We're sitting there wondering why the inclusion doesn't feel like enough.
So to figure out why we feel so disconnected, we really need to completely decouple these two concepts.
Yes.
We have to examine the mechanics of each one in isolation, so let's pull them apart. If we look strictly at social acceptance, the author argues it feels mostly like a binary switch.
Right, a yes or no.
Yeah, you're either in or you're out. The essay defines acceptance as a relational posture. It's a group, or an institution, or even a person simply saying, you are permitted to occupy this space.
And a crucial mechanic of that relational posture is that it requires absolutely zero curiosity.
Zero.
None. Acceptance is just an allowance of proximity, but it demands no depth. Like, think about a family that sets a place at the dinner table for, say, a prodigal sibling who has been gone for years.
Oh, that's a good example.
Right. They are welcoming that sibling back into the fold, granting them acceptance. But they might do this without ever once asking what drove the sibling away in the first place.
Wow.
Or what they experienced while they were gone. Or, in a corporate setting, a workplace can tolerate a divergent personality style without anyone in the office having the slightest desire to know what it actually feels like to be that person.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So acceptance is basically handing someone the key to the house.
I like that, yeah.
You are letting them through the front door. They're safe from the elements. They're allowed to sit on the furniture. They are formally inside. But giving someone the key doesn't mean you're ever going to ask them how their day was.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean you are going to look at the art they hang on their walls or care about their internal life. It's just the granting of physical or social access. And as the essay points out, that access usually comes with strings attached.
Oh, absolutely. Most social systems routinely grant acceptance on the strict condition that the individual suppresses certain parts of themselves to fit the established culture.
Right.
It's a conditional allowance.
Yeah.
You get to stay in the house, provided you don't make too much noise or rearrange the furniture.
Which sets up a really sharp contrast with the other side of the equation, right?
Yeah.
Social understanding. So if acceptance is just handing over the key, understanding is an entirely different mechanism. The essay calls it a cognitive and empathic movement.
Right. It's an active, deliberate effort. Understanding requires you to accurately perceive another person's interior. You are actively reaching into their specific worldview, decoding their motivations, grasping their emotional logic.
You're trying to see their particular way of being alive.
Exactly. But, and here's the really critical distinction the author makes, this empathic movement does not guarantee belonging.
Okay, wait. I actually really struggled with a specific claim the author makes here, so I want to push back a little.
Sure.
The essay states that understanding does not require agreement.
Right.
But, human nature kind of dictates that if I put in the exhausting cognitive work to dig into your worldview and I perfectly grasp your internal logic, I'm naturally going to sympathize and agree with you. It feels like those two things should be permanently linked.
Well, conflating empathy with endorsement is the trap most of us fall into. Yeah. The moment we make our understanding contingent on agreeing with someone's choices, the understanding collapses. It just stops being genuine comprehension and becomes like conditional acceptance wearing a mask.
Oh, wow.
Right. To understand a person is simply to see them clearly, not to validate them. Take the legal system as a really stark example.
Okay.
A judge can listen to a defendant and perfectly understand the complex, maybe tragic background that led to a crime. The judge can fully grasp the internal coherence of why the defendant made those choices given their circumstances.
Right. They see the whole picture.
Exactly. That is profound understanding. But the judge will still refuse them belonging in society by sending them to prison.
Okay, that makes sense. Or, looking at it through a family dynamic, you see this with estranged siblings a lot.
Oh, for sure.
Two people who grew up in the exact same house might know each other's emotional triggers and flaws with, like, laser-like precision.
Yeah.
They understand exactly how the other person's mind works, but they haven't spoken in a decade. They maintain this strict, rigid distance. So they possess total understanding, but they offer zero acceptance.
Exactly. They are reading the diary, but they've changed the locks on the house. These are just fundamentally different movements of the human mind.
So if they are so different, like a spatial allowance versus a deep cognitive reach, why is the blur between them so pervasive? Like, how did society end up fusing these two things together so tightly that we can barely tell them apart?
Well, it actually traces back to the neurological mapping of our earliest positive experiences.
Really, like childhood stuff.
Yeah, exactly. In truly healthy peak developmental relationships, like secure infant attachment with a highly attuned parent acceptance and understanding happen simultaneously.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so when a distressed toddler is comforted by a parent, they're being fully met. They're seen for exactly what they are experiencing in that moment, which is understanding. And they're warmly held and comforted, which is acceptance.
So the brain just wires them together because they co-arise in those formative moments.
Precisely. The warmth of that dual experience fuses those concepts into a single neural expectation. And then you fast forward to adulthood, and we unconsciously project that childhood template onto our marriages, our friendships, our careers.
We just assume that if someone offers us the warmth of inclusion, they must also see our interior life.
Right.
Which honestly explains the lingering, quiet loneliness that creeps into long-term relationships or tight-knit friend groups.
Yeah, it really does.
I mean, we mistake being tolerated for being known. We get invited to the Friday night dinners, we get the group chat notifications, and our brain registers the acceptance. But the harder, heavier work of actually being seen isn't happening.
And the fallout from this confusion kind of dictates how we treat each other when things get difficult.
How so?
Well, we often perform one to avoid the friction of the other. Consider a scenario where a friend is spiraling into a severe depressive episode. The absolute easiest route is to perform acceptance. The friend group might invite them to every outing, flood their phone with supportive emojis, and constantly say things like, we are here for you.
It's the aesthetics of support.
Exactly, the aesthetics. It's offering the warmth of inclusion to avoid the heavy lifting of comprehension. Because nobody actually sits down and asks the dark, uncomfortable questions about what the depression actually feels like from the inside.
Right, because navigating that messy interior takes immense emotional calories.
So many calories. So the group offers a superficial blanket of acceptance to shield themselves from the grueling cognitive movement of understanding. And the depressed friend receives all the markers of belonging, yet feels entirely invisible.
We offer the key to the house because we're terrified of what we might read in the diary.
Exactly.
Man. So uncoupling these terms helps explain a lot of everyday social friction. But the essay takes this a step further, right? It moves away from just defining the terms into a pretty radical claim about how we actually process these experiences.
Yeah, this is where it gets really profound.
The author argues that there is no universal scale for feeling seen.
Right. This shifts the essay from a psychological observation into a structural one. The text posits that every single person's experience of acceptance and their capacity to feel understood exists on a uniquely calibrated spectrum.
And when the author says spectrum, they don't mean a shared ruler that we are all measured against.
No, not at all.
It's an internal architecture that is completely custom built for your specific configuration of life.
Exactly.
Because we generally default to thinking of social acceptance like a shared thermostat in an office building.
Right.
We assume that if the cultural thermostat is set to 72 degrees, it's going to feel comfortable to everyone in the room. If a manager says good job in a meeting, or if a friend remembers to text you on your birthday, society just assumes those gestures carry a standard universal weight of belonging.
Yeah, we totally project our own internal thermostat onto everyone else. But the reality is that the materials building your personal architecture are highly specific. Your baseline for what feels like acceptance is shaped by your neurology, your sensory thresholds, your historical experiences of being marginalized or centered,
Yeah.
and even the particular way your family handled conformity when you were a child. None of us carry the exact same substrate into a conversation.
Okay, let's apply that to a workplace environment for the listener.
Sure.
A manager might notice that an employee looks overwhelmed and quietly offer to take a minor task off their plate. Now, for an employee who grew up in an environment where their needs were constantly ignored and who has spent years feeling invisible in their career, that tiny gesture of recognition might be earth-shatteringly transformative.
Oh, completely.
It hits their unique spectrum with massive force.
And that exact same gesture, delivered with the exact same tone by the exact same manager, might register as completely ordinary, or maybe even slightly patronizing, to a different employee who grew up in an environment rich with constant mutual perception and praise.
Right.
Neither employee is misinterpreting the gesture. Their internal calibrations are just fundamentally different.
And the author uses a massive philosophical term to anchor this idea. They call this an ontological fact.
Yeah, ontology.
Which is the study of reality, of being itself.
Yeah.
So the essay isn't just suggesting that people have different emotional preferences. It's claiming that reality itself is irreducibly particular to each person.
Right. Each human consciousness is a singular arising. Your particular configuration of awareness, history, and neurology has never existed before, and it will never exist again in this exact form.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Because no two interior lives are the same, the experience of acceptance cannot be standardized. It isn't a general concept that we all just tap into. It is a unique event that happens differently inside every single person.
Okay, but, and I have to push back here, if uniqueness is an ontological fact, scaling this up to a societal level seems like an absolute administrative nightmare.
Oh, it is.
Like, how can any school district, large corporation, or government institution possibly function if every single person requires a totally customized approach to feeling included?
Well, they generally fail at this precisely because they cannot scale singularity.
Right.
Systems have to build their policies on the assumption of an idealized average person. They create standardized inclusion initiatives based on a demographic median.
A median that doesn't really exist.
Exactly. Because that assumed average doesn't actually exist in the physical world, anyone whose unique spectrum falls outside that narrow band is included in theory, but entirely excluded in actual lived experience.
But realistically, human cognition relies entirely on categorization.
Sure.
We have to stereotype to some degree just to process the sheer volume of data we encounter in a day. We group things to survive. Like, if I have to treat every barista, every coworker, and every neighbor as an infinitely complex, unprecedented event, my brain is going to short circuit before I even finish my morning commute.
Yeah.
It's just impossible to abandon categories entirely.
The author doesn't deny the cognitive necessity of categories. It's how the brain conserves energy.
Right.
But the essay highlights the danger of letting that cognitive shortcut run our social structures. To step beyond a category and genuinely reach toward the irreducible particularity of another person requires deliberately countering the mind's natural lazy motion.
It's exhausting.
It is so exhausting. But when we refuse to exert that effort, especially at the institutional level, we create really dangerous power dynamics.
Looking at how institutions interact with marginalized groups, you see this dynamic play out historically and currently.
Absolutely.
Systems often mandate acceptance, meaning the formal integration of physical bodies into a university or a corporate headquarters, without putting any resources toward understanding the interior lived experience of those individuals.
And in that context, acceptance just acts as a mechanism of assimilation and control. The institution is effectively saying, you are permitted to occupy space within our walls, but only if you fit into our pre-existing cultural template. We will not alter our systems to comprehend your unique architecture.
They are handed the key to the corporate house, but they are implicitly told not to speak their native language or bring their actual history into the boardroom. It's inclusion stripped of understanding.
Yes. And the inverse is just as damaging.
Right.
Marginalized groups are frequently subjected to hyper-understanding without any accompanying acceptance.
Wait, how does that work?
Well, they are exhaustively studied, analyzed, and documented by the dominant culture. They are comprehended as demographic data points, clinical observations, or sociological trends.
No, I see.
The dominant culture understands the mechanics of their existence but denies them actual subjective belonging in the community. Turning a human into an object of study is a way to maintain distance. Both scenarios, inclusion without understanding and understanding without inclusion, are just mechanisms of alienation. Deepest belonging requires engaging with what the essay calls a person's inconvenient particularity.
Inconvenient particularity. It's highly inconvenient to really know someone.
Extremely.
It is so much easier to interact with the avatar of a person or the broad demographic category they represent. Navigating their unique, custom-built spectrum takes time, patience, and a willingness to be wrong.
But the realization that everyone's spectrum is unique carries an incredibly liberatory payload. It entirely dismantles the need for social comparison.
And we spend so much time wondering why we feel needy or disconnected when everyone around us seems perfectly content. You look at a friend group and think, why isn't this monthly dinner enough for me?
Right.
Why do I feel lonely when everyone else is having a great time?
Well, if your calibration for what counts as belonging is internally set by your specific history and neurology, measuring your social experience against someone else's is illogical.
It makes no sense.
None. What feels like abundant inclusion to them might feel like starvation to you, and that divergence is not a character flaw. It is just the reality of your unique ontological makeup. You are freed from expecting other people to process social connection exactly the way you do, and you're freed from judging yourself when your needs look totally different than theirs.
Bringing this all together, the essay is essentially asking us to hold a dual awareness as we navigate our lives. We can't pretend that categories don't exist. We need frameworks to buy groceries, navigate traffic, and function in a complex society.
Sure.
But we have to remain vigilant for the exact moment the specific human standing in front of us exceeds the framework we've placed them in.
Absolutely.
We need to notice when we are offering warm, superficial tolerance to a category rather than doing the heavy lifting of comprehending an individual. We have to continually ask, am I just letting this person into the house, or am I actually asking them what it feels like to live there?
It demands a level of precision and intentionality in our relationships that is rare. It's the conscious choice to stop treating a person as an example of a type and start treating them as an unprecedented event.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on today for you, the listener. The essay prompts us to reflect on relationships where we experienced that disconnect, where we were granted the key but never asked about our interior, or where we were analyzed perfectly but kept out in the cold. But consider this. If uniqueness is truly an ontological fact, and every single consciousness is a singular event that will never exist again in exactly this form, what does that mean for how you interact today with the person you think you already know best in the world?
Yeah.
Because even they are not a fixed category. They are a singular arising. And it is entirely possible you've been holding the key to their house for years without ever truly looking at the art on their walls.